Thank you for joining us. I hope everyone had a wonderful Yom Tov. We will begin with chapter 1, verse 26. This is, of course, a very good parsha to only have 2 days to discuss, but we'll try to touch on some of the many fascinating issues in this parsha. Chapter 1, verse 26. Vayomer Elokim, and God said, Na'aseh Adam b'tzelmeinu kidmusei. Let us make man in our form and in our likeness. And man, humanity, will rule over all these different creatures. Of course, the very, very famous question that jumps out in this pasuk: so what in the world does God mean when he says, let us make man? What does he mean when he says us? It's God doing it. By the way, just to think about something a little more technical for a second, forgetting the I versus we, it's like a preparatory statement. Let us do this. If you look at verse 24. God said, "Let the land bring forth nefesh." You know what I mean? 25. God made. The whole statement here is just an interesting statement. Okay. Rashi and Chavav Na'aseh Adam. We learn from here the humility of God. Humanity will be more like angels than any other life form in this world, and it's logical for the angels in heaven to have a sense of jealousy towards humanity. So therefore, as a derech eretz, as a menschlichkeit, we would say, God consulted with the angels to make them part of the process. So that's just a fascinating thing. There's so much discussed about this, about that God is teaching us in this pasuk how much thoughtfulness and consideration for others is a core underpinning to how he wants us to lead our lives in this world. That's what Rashi says. Let's go to the Ramban. Ramban on Chavav. Vayomer Elokim Na'aseh Adam Nisyachid b'asiyas Adam Mamar b'avur goldo ma'ala. So this preparatory phrase that we spoke about is unique for the creation of humanity because of the great prominence of humanity. The nature of a human being is so fundamentally different than another animal, and therefore the way it talks about God's creating them needs to be in a more special manner. Now, moving on to the issue of let us create. He says, what's the pshat in that? The Ramban discusses earlier in this parsha that a very, very famous Ramban, that God created the matter from which everything else in the world would be created on the first day. So the yesh me'ayin, the creating something from nothing, happened on the first day. And then all the other creations for the rest of the days of creation were all working with that which God created on the first day, sort of reshaping and reforming it, working with all that matter. But the matter was created on the first day. So from the matter created on the first day, God created all kinds of things. So the Ramban says, when he says in the pasuk, let the water bring forth creatures and let the earth bring forth animals, he says that's the pshat, that when he created the water, there was this capacity within the water for these other things to come forward. When he created the earth, there was this capacity for these other things to come forward. And that was all emanating from the original matter created on the first day. But by man, God says something else. He doesn't say, let the earth bring forth man. Amar ba'adam nasa, when he said by a human being, let us make a klomar, ani v'ha'aretz haniskeres nasa adam. So according to Ramban, he's not consulting with the angels. God says, I want to make a human being together with the earth. Shetotzi haaretz haguf misodeha kasher asasa b'behema uv'chaya. I want the earth to bring forth matter with which to create, like happened with animals. When Adam is actually created, it says that God created him dirt from the earth. But the creation of the human being from the earth is only part of the formula, because then God will bring a soul, God will breathe a soul in. So that's nasa. I want to come together with the earth to create this fascinating creature that's really a dichotomy of physicality and spirituality in a way that no other life form in our world is. That's the idea of Nase Adam, let us make man, according to the Ramban. Next, Ramban, B'Tzameinu K'Musenu, in our form, in our likeness, Ki Yidmeh L'Shneim, that man will hold similarity to both the earth and God. That aspects of the body of man will hold similarity to the earth. And in the spirit of man, in the soul of man, man will be like the upper realms. The fact that man, the spirituality of a human being does not die. Right? In other words, the soul lives forever. The soul exists forever. That's because the soul is similar to God's essence, or the essence of the celestial beings. The Amr because of Hashem that Kimbaro. So now it also says later on that God created man in the likeness, in God's likeness. Now, what do you mean? We're saying man is created in the likeness of both God and earth. So why does it say that man was created in the likeness of God? So the Ramban says the pshat in the pasuk is to accentuate the uniqueness of the creation of man. In other words, a lot of creatures are created from the earth, but man has this unique component. So we emphasize it by repeating later on in the psukim that man was created in the likeness of God. Okay, that's what the Ramban says. And now we're going to go on to the Kli Yakar. It's the second Kli Yakar on Pasuk Chaflav. Umash Amar Kivitzelem Elokim Asas Adam. This idea that God made man in God's likeness. L'sapra Pelishbo Nivdal Ha'adam Mishar Ba'alechai. He's citing the Ramban that we're emphasizing the wonder of the creation of man. That man is so different than other life forms. Kli Yakar says so many agree with the pshat of the Ramban, and there's so many ideas shared about let us make man. What does that mean? But the Kli Yakar says, I want to go in a different direction. Kli Yakar says, you know what it means? Let us make man. It actually shows that God's dominion over the world only becomes clear once humanity was created. Lahoros to teach, she'ikr malchusa yisparach nireh bibrias min ha'adam asher yatzer l'chvod. That the main ability to see God's dominion over this world only comes when God creates the human race. Vinyanat selam v'atmos af mishenemar ma'atmos tarchulo chsev elmi tedamyuni v'ashveh mikomokim atzim shakadosh baruch hu misrael l'neviyav b'dimyon tmos adam ki b'har sinai nira kezakin yoshev b'yeshiva. So he says, by the way, Rashi says an idea like this also. Of course, we don't mean that man is just like God. We of course don't mean that. But he says what is true is that you have various times where God appears in some form to a Navi, to a prophet, in the form of a human being. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that God has two arms and two legs? Of course not, says the Kli Yakar. But he says that the pshat is, there's a lot of discussion about this point, but the Kli Yakar's point seems to be that only through humanity, whether it be human beings' understandings, whether it be the great things that human beings are able to accomplish in this world, whether it be the growth that human beings are able to have, only through the human race does God become apparent in this world. And so therefore, if he's going to present himself to prophets in some way, of course, God doesn't have a physical image, but the image of a human being is not a bad image for the mashal, for the metaphor, because God is only seen in this world because of the human race. And so now when he presents himself to a Navi, it's in the form of a human being. An interesting idea to think about. Okay, let's go on to chapter 2, verse 18. Chapter 2, verse 18. So God has created Adam, and now God says, Vayomer Hashem Elokim, God says, Lo tov heyos Adam levado. It's not good for man to be alone. Es elo ezer kinecto. I will make for him a helper opposite him. If anyone wants to know where God got this line from, it's because he was at numerous Sheva Brachas where they all said it, and Hashem thought it was a wonderful. But we hear this pasuk quoted all the time at Sheva Brachas. The idea of a couple and being together and growing with each other, of course, beautiful, beautiful idea. Ramban and pasuk Yud Ches. Now, but remember, I mean, the bottom line is at this point, mankind is one being, and God says, you know, it's not good to be just one being. I want to make two. What would have been if God wouldn't have had this sentiment? Of course, this was all part of the plan, but theoretically speaking, if God wouldn't have felt that man needs to have a partner, what would have been? Would man be alone? All the other life forms are created in pairs. Separate question. Would the plan be that man would reproduce? How would that work? Ramban, Lo tova yos adam levado. Einenu nira shenivra adam lios yachid ba'olamo v'lo yolid. Ramban says it's hard to believe that the plan had been that there'd be this one human being who would never reproduce. Shekol hanivraim zachar and keva mikol basar nivru lakim zera. I mean, why do you think, says the Ramban, that all these life forms were created male and female? Part of it is to be able to reproduce. He creates grass, he creates trees with the capacity to create more. So what is, you know, after further thought, I think Adam should have a partner. Well, what's your plan? How would there ever be another generation? There's a famous discussion in the Gemara. It says in the pasuk Zachar and Keva that God created the male and female. There's an opinion in the Gemara that says that actually a human being was created with two sides, essentially. There's sort of like a male side and a female side. So he says, you know, theoretically, if you say that the human being was created as like essentially a male and female component together, and Chava was essentially taking that to be a separate being. So Ramban says it's theoretically possible that the male and female components in one being could work together to reproduce. That's an interesting idea. Why would a human being be different than all others? So the point is that man is so different than all the other beings, than all the other creatures. So maybe it would have been possible that God would have had a way for man to reproduce through this combination of male and female together, and they'd be able to reproduce in that way, but man stands alone. And then to that, God says, specifically, man needs to have a partner not to reproduce, says the Ramban. Reproduction could be figured out in other ways. Man needs to have a partner to grow together, and then you can say whatever lovely ideas you say at Sheva Brachos. So we discussed this morning ideas regarding Nasi Adam, let us make man, Rashi and the Ramban, with also come from the Kli Yakar, and we also discussed the Ramban. What would have mankind looked like if God wouldn't have decided to create a partner? Any comments? Okay.